The Rose of Greenwood. Chapter 3. Winds of Change. That morning, too, Rose opened her diary. May 20th, 1921. Today, something felt different in the air of Greenwood. Rose Washington woke before dawn, as had become her custom, but this morning carried a subtle tension that she couldn't quite name. The spring air that drifted through her bedroom window still smelled of honeysuckle and fresh earth, but underneath those familiar scents lay something else. A metallic quality that reminded her of the moment before a thunderstorm. She rose quietly and moved to the window, looking out over Greenwood Avenue in the pre-dawn darkness. The street lamps cast their usual pools of golden light, and the red brick buildings stood solid and reassuring as always. Yet Rose felt an inexplicable unease, as if the very air held its breath. Perhaps it was the conversation she'd overheard at the library yesterday. Two men, voices lowered, discussing talk from across the tracks. Or maybe it was the way Mrs. Henderson had paused in her cataloging, staring out the library window with an expression Rose had never seen before, something between worry and defiance. "Rose?" Her mother's voice came softly from the hallway. "You're up early, even for you." "Couldn't sleep, Mama. Something about this morning feels different." Clara Washington appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day in her working dress and crisp white apron. Her dark eyes studied her daughter's face with the careful attention of a mother who had learned to read her children's moods like weather patterns. "Different how, child?" Rose turned from the window, unable to articulate the feeling that had settled in her chest like a stone. "I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. Just restless, I suppose." "Your father was restless too. Been up since 4, reading his medical journals and checking his supplies." Sometimes the body knows things before the mind catches up. Clara moved to Rose's dresser, automatically straightening the few items there. "Get dressed, honey. I'll make us some tea before the rest of the house wakes up." 20 minutes later, Rose found herself sitting across from her mother at the kitchen table, both women cradling steaming cups of chamomile tea. The kitchen was peaceful in the early morning quiet, lit only by a single oil lamp that cast dancing shadows on the yellow walls Clara had painted the previous spring. "Mama," Rose said carefully, "have you noticed anything unusual lately? People seem more worried than usual." Clara sipped her tea slowly, considering her words. "Your father's been having more evening visitors. Men coming by after their work, staying late to talk in his study. And yesterday, Mrs. Patterson asked me if we had somewhere safe to keep our important papers." "Safe from what?" She didn't say. "But Rose, honey, you know as well as I do that when colored folks prosper, some white folks take notice. And not always the friendly kind of notice." Rose felt the knot in her stomach tighten. She had been trying to dismiss the whispered conversations, the worried glances, the subtle changes in atmosphere that had been building over the past weeks. But her mother's words gave voice to the fears she'd been pushing aside. "What does Papa think?" "He thinks we should be prepared. Not scared, but prepared. Your father's seen enough of the world to know that success can breed resentment, especially when it challenges people's ideas about where colored folks belong." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the house settle around them and the first tentative bird songs beginning outside. Rose found herself thinking about her evening students, about the dreams they were working so hard to achieve. Mr. Thompson wanted to read Bible stories to his grandchildren. Grace Mitchell dreamed of writing letters to her sister in Chicago. These simple, beautiful aspirations seemed so far removed from whatever tensions were building beyond Greenwood's borders. "Rose," her mother said softly, "promise me something. If things ever feel uncertain, you'll be careful. You'll come home. You won't try to be brave in foolish ways. Mama, promise me." Rose looked into her mother's eyes and saw not just worry, but a deep, abiding love that would sacrifice anything to keep her family safe. "I promise, Mama, but surely things won't come to that. This is 1921. We live in America. We have rights." Clara smiled, but it was a sad smile that carried the weight of experience. Rights on paper, honey, and rights in practice can be two different things. Your father and we've seen enough to know that. Dr. Washington's footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed in his professional attire, dark suit, white shirt, carefully knotted tie. But Rose noticed the shadows under his eyes and the tension in his shoulders. "Good morning, ladies. You're both up early." "Couldn't sleep," Rose and Clara said almost simultaneously, then looked at each other with rueful smiles. "Seems to be going around," Dr. Washington said, settling into his chair and accepting the cup of coffee Clara poured for him. "I've been thinking we should have a family conversation about some of the changes that seem to be happening in our broader community." Rose felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of changes, Papa?" Dr. Washington stirred his coffee slowly, choosing his words carefully. "There's been talk, Rose. Nothing specific, nothing immediate, but talk nonetheless. Some white citizens of Tulsa have been expressing concerns about Greenwood's prosperity." "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that suggest they believe there's a natural order to things, and that our success somehow disrupts that order." His voice carried a bitter edge that Rose rarely heard. "They see our businesses thriving, our children getting educated, our families building wealth, and they wonder why we aren't content to remain in the positions they think we should occupy." Rose felt anger flare in her chest. "We have every right to prosper. We work hard, we contribute to the community, we harm no one." "Of course we do. But rights and reality don't always align, daughter. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge?" "We continue living our lives," Clara said firmly. "We continue building, learning, growing. We don't let fear stop us from being who we are." "Agreed. But we also stay alert. We prepare. We make sure we're ready for whatever challenges might come our way." Tommy's voice called from upstairs, breaking the serious mood of their conversation. "Rose, you better not use all the hot water." Dr. Washington chuckled, some of the tension leaving his face. "And we remember that life goes on. That boy has been complaining about the hot water situation for 3 months now, as if it's the most pressing issue in the world." "Maybe it is, for him," Rose said, smiling despite her worries. "Maybe that's what we need to remember, that for every big concern, there are 1,000 small joys. 1,000 normal moments that make life worth living." After breakfast, Rose walked to the library alone, Tommy having left earlier for a school field trip to the Tulsa oil fields. The morning was beautiful, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of the flowers blooming in front yards throughout Greenwood. Children were already playing in the streets, their laughter echoing off the brick buildings. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, preparing for another day of commerce and community. Looking at the vibrant life around her, Rose found it almost impossible to believe that anyone could view this thriving neighborhood as a threat. Greenwood was an achievement, a testament to what was possible when people were given the opportunity to build their own futures. It was beautiful, prosperous, and peaceful. But as she walked, Rose began to notice things she hadn't paid attention to before. The way conversations stopped when she passed certain groups of men. The serious expressions on faces that were usually cheerful. The fact that several businesses that normally opened early were still closed, their owners perhaps delayed by meetings or conversations that couldn't wait for regular business hours. The library, when she reached it, felt like a sanctuary of normalcy. Mrs. Henderson was already there, cataloging new arrivals with her usual methodical attention to detail. The building smelled of books and lemon oil and the faint vanilla scent of the cookies Mrs. Henderson brought from home every Friday. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, looking up from her work. "You're here early today." "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start on organizing the children's section." Mrs. Henderson studied Rose's face with the sharp perception of someone who had spent decades reading not just books, but people. "Something troubling you?" Rose hesitated, then decided on honesty. Mrs. Henderson had lived in Greenwood longer than almost anyone else. If there was context to be understood, she would have it. "There's been talk, Mrs. Henderson, about tensions with the white parts of town. My parents seem worried, though they're trying not to show it." The older woman nodded slowly, setting down her pen. "I've heard the talk too, child. Been hearing it for weeks now. What do you think it means?" "I think it means we've become too successful for some people's comfort." Greenwood has grown from a small settlement to a thriving community in just a few decades. We have our own businesses, our own banks, our own schools and hospitals. Some folks across town seem to think that's inappropriate. But surely they can't object to people bettering themselves? Mrs. Henderson's laugh was dry and knowing. Oh, honey, people can object to anything if they set their minds to it. The question is whether they'll content themselves with objecting, or whether they'll decide to do something about their objections. Rose felt a chill despite the warmth of the morning. You think they might actually do something? I think we should be prepared for any possibility. Your father's a wise man, Rose. If he's concerned, there's likely good reason for it. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Rose organizing books and Mrs. Henderson continuing her cataloging. The familiar routine was soothing, and Rose found herself beginning to relax. Perhaps her morning unease had been nothing more than too much coffee and too little sleep. Around 10 o'clock, the library door chimed, and Grace Mitchell entered. She had been coming to the library every few days since joining Rose's evening class, checking out simple books and practicing her reading during her lunch break from the Dreamland Theater. "Good morning, Miss Washington," Grace said, approaching the circulation desk with a book tucked under her arm. "I finished this one you recommended." Rose looked at the book Grace handed her, a collection of simple stories about family life. Just 3 weeks ago, Grace would have struggled with books meant for 8-year-olds. Now she was reading stories that many adults would find engaging. "How did you like it?" "It was wonderful. The story about the grandmother who learned to write letters made me cry. It reminded me of..." Grace paused, looking around the library. "Miss Washington, can I ask you something?" "Of course. People have been talking at the theater. The white customers, I mean. Some of them have been saying things about Greenwood, about colored folks getting too big for their britches. Does that worry you?" Rose felt her stomach tighten again. If white patrons at the Dreamland Theater were expressing these sentiments openly enough for Grace to overhear them, the situation might be more serious than she'd realized. "What kind of things have they been saying?" Grace glanced around nervously. "Nothing specific, really. Just comments about how things need to be put back in their proper place. About how some people don't know their station. The manager told us cleaning girls to keep our heads down and not say anything back, no matter what we hear." "That was wise advice from your manager. But it's not fair, is it? We work hard, we don't bother anybody. Why should we have to keep our heads down?" Rose studied Grace's face, young, earnest, filled with the sense of justice that came from someone who was just beginning to understand her own worth and dignity. It was the same expression Rose saw on many of her students' faces when they realized that education could open doors they'd never even imagined. "You're right, Grace. It's not fair. But sometimes fairness and safety don't align, and we have to choose which one to prioritize. But if we always choose safety, how do we ever achieve fairness?" The question hung in the air between them, profound in its simplicity. Rose realized that Grace, who had just learned to read a few months ago, had articulated something that philosophers and activists had been grappling with for generations. "That's a very wise question, Grace. I think the answer is that we have to be strategic. We push for fairness when we can do so safely, and we prepare for the times when safety has to come first." "And how do we know which time is which?" Rose looked at this young woman who worked as a cleaning girl but asked questions that would have impressed the professors at the college she'd attended, and felt a familiar surge of pride and protectiveness. Grace represented everything that was beautiful about Greenwood: the opportunity for growth, for learning, for becoming more than circumstances might suggest possible. "We stay alert," Rose said finally. "We listen to wise people who have experience. And we trust our community to help us make good decisions." Grace nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. She checked out another book, this one slightly more advanced than the last, and left to return to her work at the theater. After Grace left, Rose found herself unable to concentrate on her library tasks. The conversation had crystallized her growing unease into something more concrete. If tensions were high enough that theater managers were warning their colored employees to keep quiet, if white patrons were speaking openly about putting people in their place, then perhaps her parents' concerns were well-founded. Around noon, as Rose was eating her lunch in the library's small back room, she heard raised voices from the street outside. Through the window, she could see a group of men gathered near the corner of Greenwood Avenue and Archer Street, their body language tense and animated. Rose recognized several of the men, business owners, church leaders, respected members of the community. Dr. Jackson was there, and Mr. Williams from the tailor shop, and several others whose faces were familiar from Sunday services and community gatherings. Unable to resist her curiosity, Rose stepped outside, ostensibly to sweep the library's front steps but actually to listen to the conversation. "Telling you, they're organizing," one man was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "My cousin works at the Tribune, and he says there's been talk about taking action." "What kind of action?" Dr. Jackson asked. "The kind that means we need to be ready to protect what we've built here." "Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," said Mr. Williams, ever the diplomat. "Talk is just talk. We don't want to create problems where none exist." "Problems already exist," another voice argued. "The question is whether we acknowledge them or pretend they'll go away on their own." Rose felt her hands tighten on the broom handle. The men's words confirmed her worst fears, that the tensions she'd been sensing were real, substantial, and potentially dangerous. "What does Dr. Washington think?" someone asked. "He thinks we should be prepared but not provocative. Ready to defend ourselves but not looking for a fight. And if a fight comes looking for us, then we'll be ready for it." The group began to disperse, the men heading back to their businesses and responsibilities with expressions that were serious but not panicked. Rose noticed that they moved with purpose, like people who had made decisions and were now prepared to act on them. As the last of the men walked away, Rose realized that Greenwood was no longer the peaceful, insulated community she had taken for granted just that morning. Something fundamental had shifted, and there was no going back to the innocence of not knowing. She spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to the conversations she'd overheard, the worried expressions on familiar faces, the growing sense that her world was balanced on the edge of significant change. When evening came and it was time for her literacy class, Rose was grateful for the distraction of teaching. Her students arrived with their usual eagerness, carrying their simple books and worn notebooks, ready to continue their journey into the world of letters and words. But even here, in the sanctuary of learning she had created, Rose could sense the underlying tension. Mr. Thompson seemed distracted, checking the window frequently. Martha Williams kept glancing toward the door as if expecting unwelcome visitors. Even Grace, usually so focused on her lessons, seemed nervous and unsettled. "Is everything all right?" Rose asked as they settled into their circle. "Just some talk going around," Mr. Thompson said carefully. "Nothing for you to worry about, Miss Rose." But Rose could see in their faces that they were worried, and their worry fed her own growing anxiety. These were people who had lived through enough hardship to recognize real danger when they sensed it approaching. They began the evening's lesson, a simple story about a family gathering for Sunday dinner, but the words seemed to carry extra weight tonight. The description of family unity, of people coming together in love and support, felt like both a comfort and a prayer. "Family is our strength," Rose found herself saying as they discussed the story. "No matter what challenges we face, when we stand together, we're stronger than we are alone." Her students nodded, understanding that she was talking about more than the fictional family in their reader. "Miss Rose," Grace said quietly, "if things got difficult in Greenwood, what would happen to our classes?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Rose realized that Grace was asking about more than just reading lessons. She was asking about the future of learning, of growth, of hope itself. "Our classes would continue," Rose said firmly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Maybe not in this building, maybe not at this time, but they would continue. Learning doesn't stop because of outside circumstances. If anything, difficult times make education more important, not less." "But what if," Grace began. "What if nothing?" Rose interrupted gently. "We don't borrow trouble from tomorrow, Grace. We focus on today, on this moment, on the words in front of us right now." She opened the reader to a new story, one about a teacher who continued holding classes even when her school was damaged by a storm. As they read together, Rose felt the familiar magic of shared learning begin to work its spell. Voices joined in harmony, minds focused on a common purpose, hearts united in the pursuit of knowledge. For this hour, at least, all was well in their small world. After the students left, Rose walked home through streets that seemed somehow different than they had that morning. The same gas lamps cast the same pools of light, the same houses stood solid and welcoming behind their front gardens. But now Rose noticed which windows had extra candles burning, which front porches held groups of adults in quiet conversation, which families seemed to be keeping their children closer to home. When she reached the Washington house, Rose found her family gathered in the front parlor as usual, but the atmosphere was different. Dr. Washington was not reading medical journals tonight. Instead, he was writing in a ledger, making lists in his careful physician's handwriting. Clara was mending clothes, but her fingers moved more quickly than usual, and her eyes frequently lifted to check the windows and doors. Tommy was at the kitchen table, but he wasn't doing homework. Instead, he was reading a letter, his young face serious with concentration. "How was the class tonight?" Dr. Washington asked, looking up from his writing. "Good. The students are progressing beautifully." "But Papa." Rose hesitated, then decided on honesty. "They're worried. We're all worried." "What exactly is happening?" Dr. Washington set down his pen and looked at his daughter with the direct gaze he used when delivering difficult medical news. "There have been threats, Rose. Nothing specific, nothing immediate, but enough to suggest that we need to be prepared for the possibility of conflict." "What kind of threats?" "The kind that suggest some people believe Greenwood has grown too prosperous, too independent. The kind that imply there might be consequences for our success." Rose felt anger surge through her. "That's insane. We haven't hurt anyone. We've built something beautiful here, something to be proud of." "Yes, we have. And that's exactly what seems to be the problem." Clara looked up from her sewing. "Rose, honey, your father and I have been talking. We think it might be wise for you to take a little vacation. Visit your aunt in Kansas City, perhaps. Just until things settle down." "Absolutely not." Rose's response was immediate and firm. "I won't run away from my students, my work, my life. This is my home." "It's not running away," Dr. Washington said gently. "It's being prudent. If I leave, what happens to my literacy classes? Who teaches Mr. Thompson to read? Who helps Grace write letters to her sister? Who shows the children in our community that education is worth fighting for?" "Rose." "No, Papa. I understand that you want to protect me. I love you for it. But I won't abandon everything I believe in because some people don't like seeing colored folks succeed." The room fell silent. Rose could hear the clock on the mantelpiece ticking, marking time that suddenly seemed precious and uncertain. Finally, Dr. Washington nodded slowly. "Then we prepare together. We make plans, we stay alert, and we hope for the best while preparing for the worst." That night, Rose wrote in her diary with hands that trembled slightly. May 20th, 1921. "Today I learned that love and hatred can grow side by side, that success can breed resentment, that fear can make even good people do terrible things. But I also learned that community is stronger than conflict, that education transcends circumstances, and that some things are worth standing for, no matter the cost. I don't know what tomorrow will bring to Greenwood. I pray it brings peace, understanding, the continued prosperity of our community. But if it brings challenges, we will face them together. We will not let fear diminish who we are or abandon what we have built. The library classes will continue. Learning will continue. Hope will continue. Whatever comes, we will continue. As we always have. As we always will." Rose closed her diary and prepared for bed, listening to the sounds of Greenwood settling into an uneasy night. In the distance, she could hear voices, not the usual evening conversations of neighbors, but something more urgent, more purposeful. She fell asleep thinking about her students, about the dreams they were building word by word, letter by letter. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight, her community still stood strong. And in the morning, there would still be lessons to teach, books to read, minds to awaken. Whatever else happened, that would continue.